So one of the biggest questions that everybody asks is, how do I gather people for my launch team? So in this episode of Practical Church Planting, we're going to give you 6 practical tips for gathering people pre-launch.
Well, thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. We're going to be giving you 6 tips for gathering people pre-launch, and something new's happening.
Something
if
new
you
is
didn't know,
We're back.
We're back. If you're watching this the video, you know that. But if you're listening to on the podcast, we are back recording video.
Yeah, we did this for like the first year and some change,
yeah.
And then I don't remember when we stopped. I don't know if it was COVID and we moved to the new space. Or maybe before that.
Yeah, I think it was before that.
At some point we stopped, but we thought we'd bring the video back.
That's
so
right.
We're on YouTube, Practical Planting or Practical Church Planting. Either way, you should find us.
Yep.
So if you want to watch the video version of this, you can do that.
Yep.
So that is what we mean by we're back. So.
And if you're just finding us for the first time on YouTube because we're posting this, you can also listen to it on podcast, Practical Church Planting, anywhere podcasts are found.
There you go. So audio or visual?
That's right.
We are in both places.
We're everywhere.
Back better than ever.
That's right.
And we're back with a really good episode. A
Yes.
lot of people ask this all the time. It was asked in our Facebook group, Practical Church Planting, the other week.
Yep.
Last week, I had a conversation with another church planter who was asking this question. This is what everybody wants feedback on, is how do you gather a team pre-launch to the launch team? And a lot of conversations I have is, like, there's a lot of philosophical ideas, but not practical tips, like build relationships and serve the community. And that's fine, but we know that. The question is, like, what can we actually do?
Yeah.
And so we want to give you 6 things that you can actually do, and hopefully these are practically applicable to your situation.
Yes.
And we want to preface this by saying your goal for the church plant dictates a lot of this. My assumption is, I know we have a few because we've talked to some people, but most people that are watching or listening to the Practical Church Planting podcast are not, like, a house church isn't their goal.
Yeah.
And so you got to define what you want your goal to be, because that will change what you want to do. So there's not one, it's not like this, there's certain things that are better than other things. It's what would you hope your church to look like in 3 years? And do things that will move you towards that goal instead of we'll just wing it and see what happens.
Right.
So this is with the assumption that you want to get maybe anywhere between 75, 200 people, and then beyond after that.
Yeah,
perhaps.
and then beyond.
So here we go. First thing is that you have to have a plan to share with people. So if you're meeting with people for the first time, or you're talking with your church plant, and you do not have a sort of plan or a timeline of what you're going to do, you shouldn't expect people to join in and say that I'm in. Again, if you listen, to this podcast, we talk a lot about how this is a big thing that I would have done differently, didn't have a real plan. And if you're meeting with someone and they're interested in joining your team, but you don't have, like, here's what it's going to look like. Of course, things can change, but if you don't have, like, a detailed plan, it makes it seem like you don't know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, then I'm not sure why I should join your team.
Yeah.
Especially, again, if you haven't launched or started yet, because people just don't understand church planting, which totally makes sense. It's like, what do you mean you're not a church yet, but you're doing church things? It's confusing. And so if you don't have something to point people to and say, here's our plan, here's what we thought through, it kind of makes it seem like you don't know what you're doing. Now, some of you would say, well, I don't know what I'm doing, which, of course, you never fully know, but you need to have some sort of an idea. I mean, it's not the same way, but if someone had a new startup company and they were looking for investors, and they just said, we're hoping this product launches in so months, and we're really excited about it, but they don't have a detailed plan of steps they're going to take to get there, then you're not going to be invested in. And in the same way, if you're asking people to join something brand new and you don't have a plan of what it's going to look like to get to starting the church, you shouldn't expect people to join your team, because, again, to them, although they might not articulate it, it seems like you don't know what you're doing, so why would I invest my time and effort in something that I'm not sure what's happening?
I think this can be especially applicable if you're younger. And because most likely you'll be talking to people who are older than you. And I just think it helps bring a little bit of credibility that you're that you really believe in what you're doing and that you're putting the work in and not just hoping that enough people gather and a church forms. And honestly, I think that you just are kind of doing people a disservice as you talk to them if you don't have a plan, because you, especially in the launch phase, you want people to not just attend, but you need people to serve, you need people to give, you need people to be invested. And I think that it's kind of disingenuous to ask people to do all these things if you haven't, I mean, this may seem harsh, but if you haven't put in the work on your end to develop a plan of what the future is going to potentially look like, or how we may get to what the future is.
Yep.
And I think that if we're going to ask people to make a commitment and do all these things, then we need to kind of do what needs to be done on our part to show them that this is actually that I don't know, that we're putting in the work, that we're doing what we wanted, that we need to do, what we need to do to make it happen.
Yeah, and we have different episodes on different things that you can do.
Yep.
And you might be like, well, I'm not sure what my plan is. So this is an encouragement before you start having a lot of serious conversations. It's one thing if you're kind of dreaming about, church planning and that sort of thing. Obviously, you want to get feedback. But if you're serious and you want people to join your team, what are the next 6 months, 9 months, a year, or whatever is going to look like? Do you have a Bible study? Do you have events? Like, what are you doing? Again, things can change at 2 or 3 months in. But if people are already invested and involved, they kind of expect that. But if you come to them, especially if you're in a new area and you don't have strong relationships because you don't know these people for very long, I just know if you came to me and asked me to join your launch team and I was just a normal non-vocational ministry person, I would not join a church plant if the pastor doesn't seem to have any idea of how they're going to get from A to B.
Yeah, and like you said at the beginning of the podcast, that we can just kind of use these terms and think of them as a plan. I think that applies to this as well. Like your launch plan needs to be actually concrete things you're going to do, not that we're going to spend this amount of time building relationships in this area and then growing to this number. It's like, if you talk to me about that, I would just want to know, what does that mean? Like, are we door-to-door evangelizing? Like, I mean, honestly, people have so many different views on how to do things, that if you just kind of use these broad terms, or these terms that don't necessarily mean much of anything, people can interpret them in very different ways. So have a concrete plan of what you're doing and kind of action steps of how you're going to get there.
Yeah, have a plan, or put another way, have a schedule. Like, what is your schedule of events or things going to look like? Obviously, things will change, but if you can present something, it shows that you've thought through it and that you kind of have an idea of how you're going to get to where you want to be, as opposed to, hey, I'm not really sure what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. Would you join this thing? Just don't be surprised. Again, it's not a knock if you don't have one yet. I would not be too discouraged or surprised if you're having a hard time getting people to join your team if people don't know what they're joining.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Have a launch plan to share with your people. And this goes very well with the second thing. And I think this is vitally important. Well, I'll say the second thing, and then we'll talk more. Here's the second thing. Don't try gathering people more than 9 months before your launch. So part of the thing is, if you don't have a plan, but you don't know when you're launching, or if you're not going to launch in a couple of years, like, people aren't going to join that. And this is where you want to spend a lot of time on the front end, which is why we talk about like church residencies or being a part of a network, like getting things together, training, planning, getting feedback, all that sort of thing, so that when you're ready, people will join. You will have a very, very hard time getting people to join your team if you don't have not just a plan, but a somewhat tangible plan. And by tangible, I mean like it's actually going to happen. Again, this is New City's big struggle when the launch phase is. It took forever for us, or for me, to like know when we were going to launch, all that sort of thing, which is really hard. I mean, we had people at our first and second vision night, which ended up being like 14 months before we launched, which is obviously, I would not recommend that, who came to the vision night and didn't come till we launched again. And then they've been here since launch because there was no plan. And so if you're too far out, it's just people can't join that because it doesn't seem real to them. Which means, again, we say, what do you want your church size to be? If you're doing a house church, it doesn't matter. But if you want to do a church if you're hoping the church is a little bit larger and you're trying to get people to join something that's a year out, that's 18 months out, they're just not going to do it. Like, I can only speak for me.
Yeah.
I would not do that. Unless I really knew you really well and was like 100% bought in, which again, when you're when you're trying to get people to join your launch team, a lot of these are newer relationships. So I would just say, if you're more than 6 to 9 months out, you probably will have a really hard time gathering people, which of course it's hard because it's like, well, launch in 6 to 9 months. I'm not sure I'm going to do that. It's just been our experience that people join things when they actually have to make a decision. It's the same thing with fundraising. Like, let's say and we talk about raising support, not just for the lead pastor, but other people on your staff. If you spend 4 months trying to raise support, 90% of the support is not going to come in till the last month. No matter how soon you start doing it, people wait till the last minute. And so if you're more than 9 months out of launching, you probably won't get a lot of people to join your launch team. And it's not really so much an indictment on you as it just doesn't feel real. And so people probably, in my experience, you're not going to have much success getting people to join.
Yeah, I feel like this seems counterintuitive to what you may want to do, because especially if you talk to other church planners or networks and stuff, I feel like no matter what stage of the process, soon if you haven't launched yet, the questions are, how many people are on your launch team,
Yep.
core team, whatever, and what do your meetings look like? Like, are you are you starting with a Bible study? Are you what are you what are your pre-launch meetings look like, regardless of what time frame you're in? And so I feel like this is something that, especially if you're a year plus out, that and you kind of have done all the other, or you feel like you're ready to get started, that can seem counterintuitive and like you're putting a pause on things. But I agree. I think just people need a little bit of immediacy to what they're doing. And just like number one, if it seems like we're just doing this thing indefinitely, and honestly, anything more than a year just seems indefinite, because it's hard to plan that far out in a realistic way. We can have ideas, but it's hard to actually have concrete plans that are more than that far out. And so just to say we're going to be meeting for this really long extended period of time, I think you might get some people who may start, but I don't think you'll have many people that'll go that entire time until you launch consistently meeting. I think you have more like what you said, where people may come once or twice, and then hopefully they'll come back when you launch. I mean, I think that's probably more of an anomaly what happened. But, but yeah, I just think you'll have better success waiting until you're in a more tight time frame.
And I'm hesitant to tell people to move up their timeline if they're not ready and all that sort of thing. But if you've done some of this other work of things that you know you want to do, and you've had relationships with other churches in the area and networks or denominations or ascending church or whatever, it's just people can't join things. And my experience with church planning, which again, we don't know everything, more than 9 months, you're gonna have a hard time. And so if that's you and you're more than 9 months out, you're discouraged about your team, it might not be so much about you and how you're not casting vision or whatever, but you need to have a plan, as we said, and it needs to be 9 months or less before most people will really say, I'm in on this, because they can see like a finish line that this is actually happening. I think if you're more than 9 months out, it kind of seems like, I'm going to commit to this and we're not exactly sure if it's going to work. Now, of course, you don't know if it's going to work, but if it just feels like we have no idea when this is actually going to happen, it's really hard for people to join. And so if you try to gather more than 9 months out, again, assuming house church is not your long-term goal, you're going to have a really hard time, I think, gathering more than 10 people on a team.
Yeah, and I think we can be hesitant to give ourselves a time frame of less than a year unless you have what seems like almost everything in place. I remember we've asked in the Practical Church Planning Facebook group when's your launch date if you haven't launched yet, and I feel like if I remember right, most were either like pretty soon, like they were launching within the next however many months, like they're really gearing up and getting ready for it, or it was a year plus out, like at the time, 2021, spring, whatever, that was a ways out. And I just feel like unless you have everything in place, people are hesitant to put less than a year on it, because then it feels like it's now. I mean, like 9 months from now is no time at all. Like it's, at least especially that's the way it seems if you don't have everything in place. And so, like you said, I mean, obviously there's some things that maybe a hindrance to this, and obviously if your setting church doesn't want to do this and things like that, but to give yourself such a huge time frame of it's going to be way out there, I think is tough for people to join, but I think is also not very smart for yourself if you have everything in place.
And just put yourself in this position, right? Let's say someone approached you and said, hey, I'd love you to join my team. You know, we're going to try some things, and maybe in a year or two we're launched. We're not exactly sure. Now, you wouldn't say we're not exactly sure, but that's what you communicate, because if you don't, now compare that to, hey, we're a new church, we're getting ready, we're launching in 7 months. Here's what the next 7 months are going to look like. We're launching in, I don't know, whatever, March or April of the next year. Obviously, at this point, we're still looking for a space. We don't know exactly sure where we're going to meet, but we're talking to people. We're gathering a team. Here's what it's going to look like. We'd love to invite you in on these things. I mean, just those two contrasts.
Yeah, totally.
Regardless of your ability to cast vision or your leadership ability or your preaching ability, those two things are so different. Like I would, if someone came to me and said, hey, we're launching in 7 months, we still got a lot of stuff to figure out, but here's the plan. Here's when we're looking at launching. Here's the area at least we're going to be. Are you interested in joining this? It's like, okay, as opposed to, we'll see.
And honestly, even if you feel like you have a concrete date and say, you talk to someone and say, we're launching in a year and a half, like, it's just, I don't know what my life's going to be like in a year and a half. I can't plan that far out to actually give you a commitment. And honestly, if you talk to me about that, it'd probably be a conversation of, come talk to me in a year. I'm not opposed to helping out, but I can't make a commitment for something that far down the road. So,
and again, things can change. So it's okay.
Yeah.
Let's say, we're launching in 7 months and then we get 2 months out and we got to push it back a month. That's completely different than we don't know. I'm a bigger fan of obviously going to plan someone in pencil, but saying, here's what we're looking to do. And people will adjust as things are happening. But by then they're already part of the team and they're excited and they know what's going on, as opposed to, we have no idea.
And, we've talked about this a lot lately, but Adam, who we just sent out to plant a church out of New City, they've known very rough time frame, not like specific month, but for a while, and it hasn't been a secret outside of like the right now when they're like actually having getting people together and stuff like that and really gearing up for launch. Before this sort of 9-month time frame, it hasn't been a secret. It's not like they haven't told anybody, but they're not actively trying to get people to commit to them outside of that. So there's like this balance of, you don't want the first time anyone in your life hears about you planting a church to be 9 months from now, or when you're going to plant in 9 months. But there's a difference between just making your plans known and letting people know you're working on things versus actually trying to get them to make a commitment to you.
Yep, that's good. So have a plan to share. 6 to 9 months, anything more than that, you're going to have a hard time gathering people.
Yeah.
Here's the third thing is to schedule fun events. So again, the challenge often is that everything that we do has to be super spiritual, or it has to, be a service, or it has to be like a community service type thing.
Yep.
And I get it. We try to do the same thing, but at the end of the day, people, the Jesus answer is you just serve the community, but we like to do things with our friends. And if you don't create any space for people to get to know each other and to hang out and to connect, then having them come to your church things is going to be hard. Like, part of the reason why all of us enjoy going to our church or being part of our churches is because our friends are here.
Yeah.
And if you don't do anything that gives space for that, then you're going to have a hard time. So on your schedule, some of the things you could do, like once a month, you have a cookout or something like that. And for the first 5 minutes, talk about the church and the plans and when the next thing you're doing, and then that's it. And just let people hang out. Watch a game or do something fun, especially for guys, especially if you're trying to get men, that you don't really know well, just come to my Bible study is fine, but they need other spaces to get to know one another, men and women. And so we would just encourage, schedule some stuff that is not like spiritual. It's just getting to know each other so you can build those relationships, which will want to make people come to other things.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I feel like we always want to start with the Bible study, which is like, I feel like it's noble in theory, but especially if not everyone you talk to is going to already have a relationship with each other. Like, it might be easy to think you have a relationship with these people, but they don't know each other. And honestly, people aren't just going to come for one relationship and continue to come. So, and it's especially if you start with a Bible study. Because you have to build some trust there, and there's some vulnerability. And if you don't have a relationship with these people outside of seeing them for a Bible study, I just wouldn't come. Like, that's a tough sell. And so having these things that's just not a spiritual thing, just a place to come hang out, is where people will really build community, and it'll make them want to come back. Because we say this all the time, but nobody joins your church plant, launch team, whatever, for you, the church planter. Nobody joins it because they love the church so much. It's because the people and the way the people make them feel. And so give people more and more opportunities to just develop those relationships.
And this is a little counterintuitive, but this is also maybe just to give you permission, because a lot of times we feel like, I've heard it said, like, what's called the mythical bishop, where it's like we feel like we have to do X, Y, and Z, and nobody's told us, and nobody's really expecting us. It's just like that's what you're supposed to do. So I just want to give you permission to have fun, and to hang out. And you want to make sure you like the people at your church too, and so schedule fun events is all we would say. Give you the permission to do that, and I think that really help you build relationships on your team.
And real quick, I'm glad you said that, because you can schedule events that are fun for you as well. Like, it's not like this has to be everything as a drag for you, and just as long as other people like it, but you're going to be more invested in and put more energy and time into things that you enjoy. That's just the way we are as people. And so if you're struggling to think of what's a fun activity to plan, it's what do you like to do, and plan around that, at least at the beginning. Like you said, if there's a game, if you're into a certain team and there's a game on, plan around that. Like, it doesn't have to be this big thing where you get everyone's feedback. It's just, what do you enjoy doing, and start incorporating other people in.
Yeah, that's good. As the leader, if you're excited, other people will be excited.
Yeah.
So schedule stuff that you want to do, and I think other people will be excited to do it as well. This leads to number 4, is to have an active social media presence. And this is important because part of the way you get people connected and for people to see what's going on is through social media. So Brian, you and Brittany, your wife, found New City before we launched, because we were like one of the only churches you could actually find. What am I from the north? I don't know where that came from. That was active before launch. Adam, who we sent out, found us on Twitter before launch. And I'm not saying like if you're active, you're going to find staff people who's going to raise their support. I'm not saying that. But people, if they're excited and they like what you're doing, they'll like your stuff. They'll share your stuff. It'll look like you're doing stuff. And so we have other episodes on even episode 2, all the way back to the beginning.
Oh man,
I think that's still relevant. You go back.
I'll have to go back and see
on social media. just you want to have a consistent presence, whether it's 2 to 3 times a week, 4 times a week. You want to schedule it consistently, have some serious stuff, but also have some fun stuff. We've said in other episodes, like a Sunday social, or there's new Pro Church Tools has social media packages you could buy. This is something that you should invest in, because especially if you're pre-launch, you're not exactly sure what to post. You can get stuff that like graphics and things like that to give you some ideas, and you can use some of those. But have an active social media presence, which means you gotta spend time and effort planning this stuff out. And honestly, with these social media platforms that you can get subscriptions to, I mean, in 30 minutes, you can schedule your next week's stuff. Because the tension is, well, you don't want to post just the same thing on Facebook and Instagram. Twitter as well, but that's a lot of, it doesn't seem like that. And what we see right now, Facebook and Instagram are the biggest social media things for churches. So it gives you things that it's not the exact same thing to post, but be active. People will like it. You can even ask your people to give you a 5-star review on Facebook and Google, which shows up in more people's stuff. But as we talk about, you want to make it easy for people to invite their friends, and sharing stuff on social media is so easy and non-threatening that it gives you more exposure and it connects you with more people in your community. And so be intentional about scheduling in your social media before you launch, because that will help you gain traction and connect with more people.
Yeah, I hope that this is the least controversial one that we have. I would hope that this is a no-brainer. Not to, but like, I don't know. I feel like if you talked to me about joining a launch team and I looked you up and you had no social media, or social media that wasn't active, to me it would just seem like you just. I don't know, does this mean not trying? Like it just seems like such an obvious thing in our day and age today, that to be at least remotely present and trying to engage people doesn't mean if you're trying things and it's not super engaging that you're completely failing, because I think just trying is doing something. But I don't know. I would just think that you don't really understand the culture, honestly, and trying to plant a church, that's a big deal. And so be active, have pictures of real people. Like the one that we use is Sunday Social, like you mentioned, and it's cheap. It's affordable. So don't, like, just because we said it's paid, don't write it off.
I think our subscription is $9 a month.
$9 a month. Like,
it's
it
super
is
cheap.
and it's worth way more than that. So, but there are things like that, and then interspersed with pictures if you have fun events, pictures from the events, and there's just all different things you can do. So just the biggest thing is just don't ignore it. Make sure you have them, and make sure you're active.
Yeah, and I think what I see is, I think a lot of people would agree this is important, but then they aren't intentional with scheduling the time, and so it doesn't happen. And then they think of it, and then like they post like 3 things in the next 2 days, and then nothing for a week. Put this on your calendar. Schedule an hour every week. Put on your calendar, I'm going to plan social media for Facebook and Instagram. Get somebody to help if I need to, and start developing a rhythm. You'll get better at it the more you do it. So you're like, what do I post? Just start, and you'll see what works, what doesn't work. But have an active presence before you launch, because that will help people find you. It'll help your people share your stuff. It might be awkward, again, for someone to invite their coworkers to like a launch team gathering or a cookout. But if they can hit the little share event on Facebook, that's easy. And it's not weird. It's not awkward. So do you have an active social media presence? And if not, you're missing out big time. And
if you don't, and you're like, I don't even know where to start, just figure out 1 post a day. That's 7 posts, 14 if you want something different, Instagram and Facebook. But that doesn't take more than an hour or 2 a week. And you can figure those out and schedule them all at one time. And you can take all the guesswork out of it if you even want to make it simple and just say, I'm going to post one a day at midday, noon, whatever. And then you can tweak from there. But it's just a starting point that you can start developing some sort of a following.
And you can incorporate, just using your iPhone, like a little Bible study, a little nugget about something, something you're learning or something like that. It just, at this point, there's really no excuse. So before, it's like, I don't know what to post. There's so much out there. If you're not doing it, it's more of a fact that you just didn't take the time to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if
totally
it doesn't have to be perfect. Just start doing something and try to find a consistent rhythm, and that will help you gather people pre-launch. So this will sound mean. If you want to gather people pre-launch and you're not doing anything on social media, I don't believe that you really want to gather people pre-launch.
Oh, definitely agree.
So
definitely
I think
agree.
you say you want to do it, but if you're not trying it, because again, this is because we have so much help now with all these softwares and organizations or whatever that are doing it. It's if we say we want to do it, we got to do it. So do that. That'll be good. That's number 4. Number 5 is to talk about your mission, and then I have in parentheses statement. Often.
Yes.
So again, people want to be called to something. And so it's not just that you're a new church and you have a Bible study thing, or you have like events that you hang out with. Like, what's the point of what you're doing? So we say often here at New City, I don't know, can they see the wall in this?
No, I don't think so.
It's right out of the shot.
It's over there.
On the side of our wall, it's our mission statement is to help people meet Jesus and grow in a relationship with him. We say that often. And I would say that whatever your statement is, I would say that all of the time, so it's common language, and it just reminds people you're doing something that's bigger than just trying to get a bunch of people together. Like, you're on mission, you want your people to experience who Jesus is, you want your community to experience who Jesus is. And so if you're constantly saying that, it reminds people that you're moving towards something and you're not just trying to start something, if that makes sense. It's more of a, this is cliche, but it's more of a movement than just a church. And that's what you want to be a part of. And so I would all the time say, here's why we're doing this. Just remind people, say your mission statement all the time. If you say it all the time, then about 25% of people can actually regurgitate it back to you.
Yeah.
And which is not a lot. So all that to say, you can't say it too much. And when you try new things, and we talk about your events and why you're trying to serve the community, or why you're doing, just hanging out events, is because you want to create a space for relationships, and relationships is where people meet Jesus, grow a relationship with him, or at least that's ours. And feel free to use that if you want.
Please,
doesn't matter.
yeah.
All of the mission statements are copies of each other.
Yes.
So I would just say talk about it often, and you're having a clear statement makes you not just ramble. So I would say have a mission statement that you say often, and of course you can talk about what that looks like in different ways and all that sort of thing. But give them like something easy to understand. This is maybe controversial, I don't know. Donald Miller, who runs StoryBrand, which is really helpful. I still have this tweet saved. I was looking at my liked tweets the other day. I was like, maybe I should unlike this. But in 2016, he quoted during the election, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, and it was not called yet, but Donald Trump was like, he was supposed to be blown out. He was supposed to lose. And then he was like winning, and now all the media was like, what's happening here? Yeah. And he tweeted something to the effect of, understandable statements or simple. He said Donald Trump is like the reason. Gosh, I'm butchering it. He said something to the effect of "simple beats complex every time."
Yeah.
And his statement was "Make America Great Again." Even if you didn't, people felt like he didn't articulate how he was going to do that. Just the fact that he had a simple statement that was clear and concise, pushed him over the edge. Whereas, and this is not a knock on anybody. It was just like Hillary Clinton didn't have like a clear, concise message. Like when Bill Clinton was running for one of his things, it was like, it's the economy, stupid. And it was like a very clear, concise, here's the problem. Even if that statement doesn't say how they were going to fix the economy, it's like, oh yeah, like small, easy statements. So hopefully that made some sense. The point is, a mission statement that is clear and concise, it draws people in. Simple, understandable statements is what people gets connected to, and that's what your mission statement can be, which is why you want to repeat it often.
Yeah, that's really good. I think we did an episode on creating mission statement like an eternity ago. Maybe it's something that we should revisit, because one thing I've always appreciated about our mission statement here at New City, and I don't feel bad saying this because I had no hand in creating it, was it's that to help people meet Jesus and grow in a relationship with him. That's just it. You don't have to guess what that means. There's nothing you don't have to know anything about the Bible to know what that means. And it just takes all the guesswork out of it. And I feel like we can, like you said, everyone's mission statement is the same idea. It's the Great Commission. Like everyone's mission statement is the same concept, but we can try and have it be this like fancy or like cutesy kind of thing where it's unique to us. And it might sound like cool, but I don't fully understand what it means if I'm like a new person, not a non-church person or a non-church regular. And so just make it like, I just feel like you can give yourself a little bit of breathing room, and that it doesn't have to be the coolest sounding. It doesn't have to like tie in perfectly with whatever if you have like a trendy church name to tie in with that. So like whatever, it's just, what do you want to do? Yeah. And that's it. And it just can be as simple as that.
And one of the things we've said is, what do you find, because it can be hard to think this in the beginning, but what do you find yourself saying over and over again? Because you as the leader, if you're not excited about the statement and you don't say it, it's not going to be said.
Yeah, true.
Here, I have my phone, I found the tweet. Donald Miller said, Trump's impressive early returns so far are evidence that a simple message, regardless of factual foundation, outperform complexity. Yeah. Simple message, regardless of factual foundation, outperforms complexity. So ours, and again, I'm not saying ours is awesome, but it's help people meet Jesus and grow in a relationship with him. That's understandable in and of itself. I'm not saying this is bad at all. So, and we could be wrong about a lot of things. When you say our mission is to love God, love others, and serve the world, for example, that's good. But that's like, what do you mean? Like, love God, love others. Like, how serve the like it just change the world. I'm not saying that's bad. It's just like that. That's like you start to be thinking, how am I supposed to do that? Now, of course, help people meet Jesus and grow a relationship with him. You're still thinking, how's it going to happen? Like, you might still think, well, how are you going to do that? But it makes sense on its own without extra explanation, which of course you need. But if you have a mission statement that needs a ton of extra explanation, people aren't going to be able to remember it. And it's going to be hard to kind of rally people around it.
Yeah.
So
I think this is a good, I mean, I guess we got a little bit off topic.
Yeah.
Talk about it. But then what you're talking about is kind of what we're talking about.
Yep.
I think it's just kind of a good lesson for the majority of things you do with a church plant, that it doesn't have to be the trendiest, coolest, fanciest thing, as long as it's simple and understandable. Like that's a lesson in preaching. Like that's a lesson in everything. And you were talking about Donald Miller in one of his books. I remember him. They were talking about websites, so this is completely different. But he was talking about building a website, and he's like, and I remember the idea was, he's like, I've seen so many of like the fanciest looking websites I've ever seen, like that I could never in a million years design, and they just look beautiful, but they're confusing and they're hard, and they just and what he's talking about is web traffic and things like that. And he's like, and they just don't get nearly the engagement of just a very simple, easy to use website. And that's just I just feel like that's a good concept to apply to a lot of things we do. Like you can have the fanciest, I mean, maybe fancy is a bad word for it, but the like a complex way of preaching where you sound really intellectual, but if you're not connecting with people, then it just falls on deaf ears. And if you have a mission statement that you feel like is a really cool concept, and it's just like it pops and whatever, but it doesn't communicate what you really need to be communicating, then it's not as effective as it could be.
Yep. So talk about your mission statement often. Make it easy to understand, because it reminds people of what they're doing, and it'll get them excited. So that's number 5. And then number 6, the 6th tip for gathering people pre-launch is to talk about your financial needs and ask people to give. As a side note, they'll join if they're financially invested.
Yeah, sure.
So that's a big thing. Now, this goes back to our first 2 points. If you don't have a plan and you're further than 9 months out, the average person is not going to join your team, and they're certainly not going to give.
Yeah.
So this kind of all works together. But talk about your financial needs often, not in a doom and gloom, we don't know if we're going to make it, but in a, hey, we're on mission, we're asking and we're praying that God would provide in this way. Here's kind of our budget, here's our plan, here's what we're looking to raise, here's how much we need for the next year or so, or whatever it is, however you want to kind of break it down. But let people know what it is often, because people want to hear about it.
Yeah.
And if they know about it, they'll probably give to it. And if they give to it, they'll join your team. Just as a side note, we are, full transparency, we're in the moment of trying to work on our 2021 budget for next year.
Yeah.
And we're not exactly sure how it's going to work, because we're in a brand new building that we moved into the first week of March, and then COVID hit. And so affording a building that you didn't grow at all and is really hard.
Yep.
And this past weekend, because we haven't finalized everything, and of course we're gonna share with the church once we get all that stuff done. But as a reminder of how important this is, somebody was saying, because we were talking about, I don't know if I should say this, I'll just say it anyway. We were talking about like me and my having to reduce my salary a little bit.
Yeah.
And because we're just trying to find ways to like figure this out. And they said, well, no, the church shouldn't do that. And I was like, okay, well, I understand like the desire not to do that. But he's like, but you need to tell the church. Like the church needs to know so that we can make sure that doesn't happen. And it was just a reminder of, again, which we already were going to do, but like not in a doom and gloom way. But if people are invested and they're excited, people often, if they don't know how they can help, they won't help. Yeah. And so this is like for us as we try to figure out 2021 and letting our church know. But it's also for you. Tell people your needs and then ask them to give. And if they give, they will join what you're doing.
Yeah. Here's the thing. People want to give to something that they're invested in. Like, I feel like I feel like we think people don't want to hear about it, and so we don't want to talk about it. But in reality, like, you don't have to be the biggest, the best Christian in the world to give to something that you support. Like, there are plenty of non-believers who give to things that they support. Like, this isn't a taboo topic. Yep. And so if people are invested, they want to give if they know that there's a need. And so you just need to be clear and communicate there's need. And especially pre-launch, because there's so many there's so many financial unknowns to someone who's not like knows your budget and things like that. Like, they don't know if there are other churches supporting. They have no idea what the cost of all this stuff is, and so they don't, in their mind, that you could either be perfectly fine if that's what you're kind of portraying without actually saying it, or you could be completely desperate if that's what you're portraying. And so just being clear about, this is where we are, and maybe we have some funding to help us get through whatever, but this is what we need. And just being crystal clear, I think people really appreciate that. You're being honest with them, but also it shows that you're that you you care enough and are kind of, like we said it before, doing your part and actually figuring these things out and not just hoping things sort of they'll work themselves out in the end.
Yep.
But like, no, we've actually created a budget. We know what this is supposed to be, and we can get there, but we have to do it together as a team.
Yeah, and this helps as well, talking about budgeting, is it shows people that you've thought through a plan.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give, now again, if your budget is $300,000, and it's just you starting the church and you don't have a building.
Yeah.
Like it has to be realistic.
Yeah.
And so that's why some counsel is obviously is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like, here's our real budget, not that people need to know the line item for each thing, but just like generally speaking, here's the percentage that's going to outreach and whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, and here's the deficit, and here's what we're doing. Here's our mission. Here's what you give towards.
Yep.
People will give to that, and of course, if they give, they're much more likely to join. And you might even have some people who are financially supporting your church and don't really have a plan to join.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And as they see your updates and they see what you're doing, they also might join in on what's happening.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's good. And honestly, I think that some people, especially if they've never been in the church planning world before, if you don't communicate it, they may not necessarily realize that they need to start giving until launch.
Which was so many things that we've shared.
Yeah.
There was a family at New City. It was the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just because like in your mind, this is church. This is your church that's getting ready to launch. But if someone doesn't really understand how all this works, then meeting in your home, they may not really associate with this is the church yet. And so it's not that they don't want to, they just may not know. And so we just have to be just as clear as humanly possible with what needs are and how we're going to get to where we need to be.
Yep. Well, that again is 6 tips for gathering people pre-launch. If you're joining us on YouTube, again, we would love to see you subscribe. And we do this every week. So you get practical tips and advice to help you plant a church that thrives and you won't miss an episode.
Yeah. And if you're listening to us on the podcast like normal and you're just curious what we look like, want to see what the lobby of the church looks like, whatever, youtube.com/practicalplanting. Check it out. Subscribe there.
Yep. And so thanks for being with us. And we will see you next time on Practical Church Planting.